Hey guys, welcome back to the Motor Madhouse podcast. I am your host, Mike, joined by my good buddy, Steve. Steve, how are we doing today?
Pretty good. Ready to talk about some cars again.
Yeah, how's your car life going? Anything new and exciting since we last recorded?
Nothing new, I've been driving my rear-wheel drive sedan in the winter, and it's been doing just fine. It's all about tires. Everybody freaks out, like, oh, how did everybody ever get around with two-wheel drive ever? But just good tires and know how to drive.
Yeah,
usually gets you around.
It is funny because we put something on the Motor Madhouse Instagram page, which you guys should all go follow, about like the Teslas freezing up in Chicago, and I don't engage in the comments because I don't have that much time. There's like hundreds of people just fighting, but it's kind of funny just to observe from afar. But a lot of people are just like the people who are pro-electric, probably pretty young kids. They're just like, oh, gasoline cars wouldn't start in this cold either. Like, no one will get to work if we're all driving carburetors. It's like,
yeah, the whole world didn't exist until
until
2014. We couldn't do anything.
Well, carburetors weren't even mainstream until the 80s.
Right.
It's like people got to work. People lived in Minnesota and North Dakota in the 60s and 50s and 70s,
I have a sister that's 10 years older than me, and she had a carbureted, it was a C20 Silverado 350 carb, and she started that thing every morning to go to school and just choked it, right, and got it going.
Yeah, you got to let them warm up, and you got to really kind of just work that throttle for a good 10 minutes, but they'll warm up in the cold. But yeah, I was going to let you know, I did decide for sure this is my last year doing snow plowing. So I already told a bunch of my customers. And in lieu of that, I was like, well, do I need to keep this truck even? Because now I know what it's been through. It's been used and abused. I wouldn't trust to drive it more than an hour. It's been just a plow truck for 3 seasons with salt and abuse. So still makes a great plow truck. It's going to run for who knows how long. Yeah. It's a 230,000 mile 6-liter LS. But so I decided I'm going to sell it once snow is gone for the season. So probably sometime in March I'll list it. But as far as my own property, I still need something to plow with. I don't want to keep a junky truck around that runs 6 days a year. Right. So I decided to buy a UTV. And
nice.
The thought was in my head, and then started looking for them. And long story short, I'm getting one delivered tomorrow.
Nice. What are you getting?
2017 Kawasaki TRX 4.
Nice. Yeah, those are good machines.
Yeah, here I had like the full enclosure with a windshield wiper, a plow, a winch, a Bluetooth stereo system in it, a 5th seat for a child in the middle. So it's like 3 in the back.
Well, so now you're ready to go on UTV trips too during the summer.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah, there's more things to do, and the kids love it. And the cool thing is they're actually street legal in my town.
Oh yeah, that's becoming really big. Like a lot of places are making them street legal, which is awesome.
Yeah, so the kids are excited. Like we have a bunch of their friends that live 2 miles away, all back roads. Like we'll just take the UTV in the summertime. So
you'd be surprised what those can plow too. I plowed with a Sportsman quad, and I can move some snow with that. Like,
oh yeah,
it wasn't bad. I mean, you're not going to take like 3-foot drifts down with it or anything, but still, that it would make some progress, right?
I just can't wait to have that short of a wheelbase. I'm not used to that. I'm used to a quad cab truck with the worst turning radius on earth.
Yeah, we were actually talking about getting another plow truck for the farm, and I don't know. I think it's side by side be the way to do it. We have a couple Rangers out there. We have 2 and a Razor, and that's probably what we'll do is get a plow for one of those. It's just way easier to get around.
Yeah, we're excited. But anyways, for today's episode, we want to do a continuation of the episode we did a couple weeks ago talking about the best cars of the 1980s. And we wanted to make this a regular segment where we go through the most popular decades of automobile production and talk about them. But then we started to kind of hammer out the details, and we're like, well, wait a minute. There's a lot of different categories to pick these from, like which is the greatest car, which are the worst, which are the most iconic, etc.
Well, the 70s has its own event too that we wanted to.
Right. And then so today we said we're going to pick 70s, and then we're talking, we're like, well, what you got to break up the 70s into 2 different segments because like the music stopped in 1972. The muscle car era like had a hard stop from the EPA. Everything got boring and slow and ugly for the most part. But so to compare, if we're going to do an episode in the 70s and talk about the best cars, well, we're not going to get past 1972. It's going to be mostly 1970. Right. So it seemed like kind of silly to just talk about that. So we're going to break this into 2 episodes. Today we're going to do the more less exciting cars, but still need to be mentioned, from 1973 to 1979 into 3 categories. So first, we'll talk about our personal favorites. Second, we'll talk about the most or the popular culture.
Yep.
And then most interesting. Sorry.
Yep.
So I think we're doing a different order. It'll be our favorite, then most interesting, and then pop culture. So, yep. Okay. So we'll start with those. And once again, we haven't talked with each other about these, so I'm not sure if we have cars that overlap.
Well, we knew one that we're gonna have to bring up anyways. This is such a good one, but
well, the good news is like we both have such different interests that it's like we tend to pick from different pools when we're coming up with these numbers.
Well, and I lean into that hard too. Like I'm sure it comes off like, oh, this guy always picks this different foreign cars, but like I figure might as well lean into that and be the the other one that does that.
Right. So. And you kind of see like, oh, Mike's just a biased GM 1970s baby boomer.
The thing is, I actually am too, but
right.
But I know a little bit about some of the foreign cars. So I think I've been kicking these off. So why don't we'll let you start
okay.
Your favorite here.
Well, let me get it pulled up. So this, was a hard one to pick because it's not only my favorite car of the 1970s, post 72. It's up there with some of the early 70s cars. I'd also put it in the most interesting category, but I couldn't pick the same car twice. Let me get it going here. So it's the 1973 and 4 Pontiac Trans Am Super Duty. So are you familiar with these at all?
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
But I'm sure you know more.
Well, they're interesting because it was like the one last middle finger to the EPA that Pontiac put out once they kind of stopped the party with muscle cars. So this car was not supposed to be built. Insurance prices were crazy, gas prices were crazy, regulation came in. So you saw compression ratios drop, you saw smog carburetors, low compression cylinder heads, all across the board. So you had all these big block 455s and whatnot making 180 horsepower overnight when they used to be making 360 to 400. So Pontiac kind of just got one last jab in, and they did it in 1973 and 74, which is really the first year when everything kind of slowed down. 72, you still had some fast cars, but 73, they somehow got around all the regulation, and they basically, the EPA had the 455 specs on paper, so they didn't really have to prove that this motor needed like a new compliance because they already had like their smogged out 455 that was in compliance with all the regulations. So they basically just kind of pushed that paperwork back through with this car and didn't tell them that they put super high flowing cylinder heads. They bumped up the compression ratio, aluminum intake, a hot cam, hot carb. It's a very unique motor, and they only made it these 2 years. And it was based like 280 horsepower or something, but it's considered the fastest Pontiac ever made. It actually, out of the box, is running like a mid 13-second quarter mile.
Wow.
And it's a very complicated statement because it's the fastest Pontiac ever made, but it's not the fastest Trans Am ever made. So as we discussed on the previous episode, the 89 Turbo Trans Am was probably a tenth or 2/10 faster in the quarter mile than this car, but that was Buick powered. The LS1, WS6 Trans Ams are about as fast, maybe a tenth faster, but that's Chevy power. So the enthusiasts say this is the fastest Pontiac ever made. So they were, in reality, 3,800 pound car running 1370. They're probably around 10 horsepower per pound, probably 400 horse, 410, somewhere in there. But they didn't make a ton of them. In 73, which is the year I prefer, they changed the body style a little bit. 73 is the red one you see here. So this is,
I do like kind of that front end.
Yeah, that's the 1970 to 73 body style. I prefer that. 74, it's got kind of that Smokey and the Bandit rectangle grill. Mm-hmm. But they were
always a couple 6 gens that they must have talked about bringing it back or something.
Yeah, I think there were some companies that did Camaros and did the Firebird conversions and whatnot. But so they only made like 250 in 73 and less than like 1,100 in 74. So not a lot of them. They weren't a hot seller. It was a very expensive option. And then a lot of the dealers marked them up too once they got them because they were super rare. and everyone kind of knew it was the last hurrah. It was like the true car guys knew, like, hey, there's still one out there. Pontiac's still making a beast. It was super low production, but it was the last hurrah of muscle cars. So like I said, it was hard to pick this for most interesting or my favorite, but I would say it was my favorite car from 73 to 79, just because it's just the anti-establishment mindset behind it. I just kind of respect. It's kind of government telling car companies to make boring cars, and they're like, all right, hold on, one more time. We're just going to sneak one through. But and I actually got a quick story about these. One of my dad's friends used to play with a lot of F-bodies, and he had a couple Super Duties when I was a kid. And one in particular we picked up, I think it was like in Racine, Wisconsin, and this guy had this beautiful house, super nice driveway, well paved. Like, looks like he had a landscape company do his yard every week, and it is a 10,000 original mile blue 74 Super Duty. And it was kind of the first time I learned about these. I was probably 10, so he's giving me the whole story about these things when we were driving up there. And he asked the seller, "Does it have a posi rear end?" Which they should all have that. And the guy responded, "I don't know," which was kind of a funny answer because my dad's buddy just loves to beat on cars. Like, every time I saw him, he's always doing donuts and burnouts. So long story short, he seals the deal with the guy. And in the guy's driveway, after he pays for the car, he just dumps the clutch and just like 2 giant tattoos down his perfectly silk blacktop driveway for a guy who didn't even know his car had posi. The thing's never even checked the tires. Just lights him up. Then he pulls out onto his country road and just does like 3 solid gears of rubber out of the driveway. And you just see the guy shaking his head in his driveway. And my dad and I are followed him on the way home. We're like, what was he thinking? Like, that guy's got to look at those marks now for years. Like,
he's gonna remember that car for a while.
Yeah. Then he sold that car to Kuwait, and this is like right before 9/11. So I kind of wonder if that car got blown up or not, or if it still exists. But
likely.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. I've heard of these, but I didn't know as much about them. I assumed it was just like a nerfed 455, but it sounds like it still had some go on it. So
no, it was one of the Pontiac's best motors because the cylinder heads were the round port heads, which were basically came from the Ram Air 4 Pontiacs, which we talked about on our previous episode from 69 and 70. So they basically took their hot 400 motor, put it on their 455, and made this for 1,200 cars.
Cool. No, that's a really good one. Right. So I teed mine up here when you're ready. So I had the debate between 2 different ones here. And I came down to the Scout. I just think this is a car that I really like from the 70s, but I have not gotten to experience yet. So the Scout 2 was made in the 70s here. And I don't know. I think when they're a convertible and you put a little wheel and tire on them, probably swap to a 350 motor, they are just absolutely cool. Like, it's the coolest vehicle I've ever seen. And we have a lot of internationals on the farm, so like I don't know why that just kind of rings a bell with me and makes me think I'd really like to have that sitting on the farm and play with it. Again, like, it's almost just the body that people even buy anymore at this point. Like, they're putting different axles underneath them, different drivetrains completely, maybe leaving the interior the way it is. But I don't know if you've ever got to experience one of these or drive one yet, or.
Yeah. I used to work with my dad. We had a little classic car dealership, and we actually restored I think it was a 64. So it was a first gen Scout. It was like a little shorter wheelbase. The little topper came off the back and turned into a bed. But it was a hard top truck, though. I know some of them were like full removable, but it was fun. We have the stock little International straight 4-cylinder. I think it was in it.
Yeah,
it's a little tiny motor.
They had a lot of motors, but yeah.
But we got it running all good. It was like brown and white when we got it, and then we painted it an Oldsmobile color, a G and Aqua, one of my favorite colors. So we kind of did our own custom stripe on it, put some Hot Wheels on it. My dad did a bunch of woodwork in the bed.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a sore subject. We thought the car was going to do really good money because these cars were getting super hot, and I think we were hoping to get like north of 40 grand for it, and we just kept dropping and dropping and dropping. I think we ended up taking like 24 for it, and then
when was that?
2015 maybe.
Oh, I think I remember us talking about this one now that you say it, but
yeah. And then it went auction to auction from the guy who bought it to us. Then this high-end dealership in St. Louis bought it, and they sold it for 64 grand with our wax on it still. They didn't even touch it. Ugh. So that was a nice little we knew it. I knew the car had the look. We just could not find the buyer. So
Yeah, this is a poor example of a photo of one. I just kind of pulled up off a wiki really quickly here, but I don't know. Anybody who knows these cars knows they can look pretty awesome. I thought an interesting fact I saw on it is they always had the gross vehicle weight of like what it could handle for weight at 6,200 pounds or something, because it's right under a government regulation that would ask it to have catalytic converters. So because they did that, they could not have to put cats on it, which,
that's pretty cool.
Again, just another one of those things, like a regulation that we just work a way around it, right?
So. Yeah. That's anytime you can beat the system, I'm a fan. But I like the second gen ones here, though. They're a little bit longer wheelbase, a little tougher looking. But yeah, these cars have gotten pretty hot. These and the international travel alls, that's like they're suburban.
Yeah, for sure.
I
mean, really, that whole segment's gotten hot. Like if you look at the Wagoneers, the Broncos, K5s, like those have all come back around, and that's where we can get into like where modern cars have went. But like Ford capitalized on it with the Bronco. Ford or Chevy screwed up. Like totally, they should have brought back the K5. That would have been that would have sold. Like there'd be one sitting right here, right now.
They can never quite read the room. It's like Ford's got to do it first, and then they copy with like the bringing the Camaro back with a retro body style and those kind of
exactly
decisions. Yeah, it was a good pick. So for my next one, most interesting for several reasons, would be the 9th generation. It started actually in 71, but it kept going through the 70s, so I could consider it. But it's the Cadillac Eldorados. So what's so interesting about a Cadillac Eldorado in these years? Well, for one, they have the largest motor ever made in Jeep by any manufacturer, with a 500 cubic inch. And are you ready for it? 185 horsepower.
That's interesting. That's exactly how that went back then.
Yeah, it's like the thing weighs 5,000 pounds. It's like how could you even make a 500 cubic inch motor that powerless? Like, are you just like suffocating the cylinder heads, like not letting anything breathe? Like it doesn't make any sense that they could pull that off. But the really interesting thing about these is they were front wheel drive.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes. So this actually started back in 66 or 7. They started doing this. This and the Oldsmobile Toronado. I think it was 66.
What was the vehicle Oldsmobile made that had a motor in the front and the back? Didn't they do that for like a short period of time?
Or
something. But
that was, they did a 442. It was like a 66 or 7. I've seen pictures of that. Like I remember one of my dad's books in black and white of seeing that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. Like the Hemi Underglass Mopar was doing that. I got to pull that thing up. It's interesting.
Yeah,
but this was it was kind of interesting though. They left the motors facing forward in these. It wasn't like conventional front wheel drive with the sideways motor today. So basically, just had like a shorter transmission with a transfer case that turned it around like a 4-wheel drive truck out to some sort of CV shaft type archaic thing. I haven't really looked at any of these
power things, robbing all the way through. Like,
so maybe they were 185 to the wheel. Maybe that's why they were so powerless. just lost like 300 horsepower through this redirection of power. But it's kind of cool when you go inside of them. There's no drive shaft hump on the floorboard. Right. So if you're like come from a big family like me, I always sat in the bitch seat in the middle in the back because I was the middle kid, and the hump seat was the worst. If you had to sit on top of the hump. So these cars were the first of their era. Like these and the old Tornados, that there was no drive shaft hump in a full size American car. So, and these were also kind of made iconic in pop culture. This was the car that like Boss Hogg and Dukes of Hazzard drove. He had the big longhorns on the hood and stuff. So like he had a couple different generations of caddies, but this was definitely in some of the later seasons. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting because biggest motor ever made was a front wheel drive car. It's just goofy, very oddball.
Yeah, it has to be it's probably not the lowest like output of power per cc or whatever, but it's got to be down there.
It's up there. It's a contender.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know they were front wheel drives though. That surprises me actually. So that's cool. I forgot to get mine going here. So my next one, no surprise, it's a BMW. So let me find that here. So I went with, and assuming you're sharing here, yep. So I went with the BMW 2002 Turbo TII is what it was. So that came out in 1974. And they only made it for 1 year because of the oil crisis. Like they were developing this car for a little while, and then it kind of was like this bad timing thing, right? And there's a little bit of history of this car. It like started out as a 1602, I think they called it. It was a 1.6 liter, and a couple of the BMW executives found out that they both took that motor in their own personal time and bored it out to 2 liters and used that for their daily. So BMW was like, well, we can probably do that too, right? And made it into a 2 liter. And then eventually I threw a turbo on it and got this thing to racing. And the thing maybe you can see in this photo here is, and during the press photos, turbo is written backwards on that front splitter on the front of the car.
Oh.
And they did that because that's what you'd be seeing coming after you on the racetrack, right? So in your rear mirror, you'd be seeing that this is a turbo. So BMW's first turbo car, and very kind of unfortunate naming for the company that made the turbo. I forgot the words exactly, but it was KKK. What was the name of the company? So they later changed it to KK and K to kind of separate themselves a little bit. so they made the turbocharger for this thing, and it put out 168 horsepower out of a 2 liter motor in 1974. So wasn't slow, wasn't fast though either. You know, tires.
I mean, it's competing with a 500 Cadillac of the same.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the 2 different ways that you could make about 170 horse, right? So had a manual transmission. You know, again, it was made for the track. The fenders and everything bolted onto it. So if you needed to get in there to work on it or put on wider tires, it was known for having these super aggressive tires, though. 185 millimeters wide. Big deal, right?
Wow.
So it was BMW's definitely their entry into the sport kind of, they call it the saloon, the sedan, which obviously this is a 2-door coupe, but it was a car that had a back seat that was light and sporty. Not like your Datsuns and your Corvettes, but something you could use every day and still be on the track with it during the day. So I think it's a really interesting car. It had pretty big brakes for the time. You know, it had good, strong transmission and, you know, lots of turbo lag. So the turbo didn't really get going until 4,000 RPM. So you can imagine this 2 liter motor just trying to like get itself up to there, and then all of a sudden just all the boost, right? So it's just a fun little car. But I think back to my first car, my first like real car that I drove all the time was a Chevy Lumina, 135 horse, right? My next was the Silverado, 165 horse. So being the 70s and this little car weighing just over 2,000 pounds, that's moving, right?
It's not bad.
Yeah.
So what's something like this worth today? A good example.
Well over 100,000.
Yeah,
right?
say only 1,600 made.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's one of those things that it doesn't have like a huge following in the States, but people who know like them. Very few of them have this like color scheme to them though, because there's a lot of 2002s and there was 2002 TIs and TIIs, but this is a turbo TII, so that's all the, you know, kind of combos together. Kind of like where you can, I think you used to have like SSs and you could have different packages within the SS, right?
Right.
So, yeah, they aren't as crazy as some of the very collectible old 70s cars, but I think they just look cool. Like to me, that's one of the coolest looking 70 cars. And yeah, so yep, that's what I'm putting down.
It's pretty interesting. I've never even heard of that, but it's not really a surprise, is it?
Yeah, it's kind of like the one that started the whole like sport saloon kind of like the normal everyday driver kind of car like that for people.
Sure. Well, we'll move on to like most iconic in pop culture of this era. And spoiler alert, I did not pick Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am. A, because I figured Steve would assume I am, and I didn't want to prove him wrong. Number 2, I already did a Firebird Trans Am for my first car. And I've done 2 GMs already, so I figured I had to at least move it across, you know, to a different manufacturer. So I went with another hugely iconic TV car at the time, which was the 76 Gran Torino, the Starsky and Hutch.
Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah.
Yeah, these are, you know, this is obviously before my time, before yours too. You might have seen some reruns growing up.
Oh yeah.
But this was like before Dukes of Hazzard, and even that was before my time. But it's kind of interesting because it is a very iconic car. But once again, in real life, this is like a don't meet your heroes type car, because you picture it's some crazy fast hot rod that's like a hero car in a TV. And these were like 351 motors with 160 horse. I mean, could not get out of their own way in real life.
Yeah, they're double digits of 60, I bet you it's like
a
10, 11 second car. 60. Yeah.
That's the ironic thing, is like all that loss of horsepower through regulation, and they didn't really gain any miles per gallon. If anything, they lost it. So it was all like sabotage. I mean, somebody should be held accountable for all this.
When you have to floor it so much longer now.
Right. And are you familiar with the air pump?
Oh yeah. Like my Silverado had one of those, right? Like,
it basically just you're taxing your motor to spin another accessory to pump air into your exhaust, so your parts per million is different.
Yep.
Like that, what kind of world that works, where you're burning less fuel.
You're just changing the ratio, right?
You're changing the ratio, and you're also just making the motor work harder to drive another accessory. So
yeah, I remember that being an issue, or that breaking in my Silverado. I'm like, why is this here? Like,
I remember getting into a debate with somebody about that years ago that wasn't really a car guy, and they started looking it up. They're like, oh no, it says it actually changes like the mixture, all this and that, makes it a cleaner burn. And I was like, if it worked, they'd still be doing it.
Yeah,
it's that simple. Like, it lasted for a few years, and they realized, like, this is stupid. We're wasting power, wasting money. Anyways, regulations. So yeah, the Starsky and Hutch car, those 76 Ford Gran Torino, still one of the most iconic things. It's never going to be the General Lee. It's not going to be like that level of of fame, but it's kind of the predecessor. Car doing jumps, being just action scene after action scene, drifting, burnouts, that type of stuff. But
this is what was the Clint Eastwood movie too? Didn't he have one of these in that?
Yeah, it was like a 71 or 2.
Yep. Yeah, I actually wasn't really familiar with this car until they redid Starsky and Hutch in like the 2000s, right?
Yeah.
But, which is hilarious. In the outtakes in the end of that, you could see all the cars they destroyed doing the jumps on. Right?
Yeah. I remember that scene where Ben Stiller's about to jump it and wreck it. And he's like, my mom said I couldn't handle this car. I couldn't handle a V8, which always made me laugh as a car guy, because I was like, I think that's barely a V8. It's so
the weakest. Yeah, the weakest V8. One of them. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. That's a really good pop. And to go back to the Smokey and Bandit, like that is like so obviously on this list, but
I'm glad it's leagues above this car as far as fame. It's a more famous car, I'd argue.
For sure. But I'm glad we didn't take the easy way out of this one. So.
Well, the Smokey and the Bandit's another one that Pontiac probably sold 1 million of those cars because of that movie. That came out in 77, and Pontiac was never the Bandit package. It's kind of like Terminator Mustang. They used it in the movie, but that was just like their whatever gold package. It was I forgot what they call it, but it had nothing to do with Bandit. It's not on the paperwork anywhere. There's not an option, but a Bandit one when you see the gold accents on the black. But that's another one where in the first 10 minutes of the movie, Burt Reynolds is driving it at a stoplight, and you just hear this nasty cammed out big block, and he just lights them up like crazy. And it's like, that is not 180 horse smogged out 45. Somebody put a Super Duty or a Ram Air 4 or something in that thing for the movie.
The best thing about that era of cars is there was so much room for improvement, right? Like, you didn't have to be very smart to get more power out of those things. Like,
no,
you could do a few things like, I just swapped the heads from this car from 5 years ago and put this carb on it, or I'm good to go. Right.
Yeah, no kidding.
Now if you want to get extra 100 horsepower of a car, now you just throw they're all turbocharged, right? So you throw a tune at it. But if you're trying to get another 100 horse out of a 95 Mustang, good luck, right? Like, without really tearing into that motor.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that. All right, I got mine loaded here. So again, I was thinking Smokey and the Bandit as well, but then I want a different direction. So what I went with is the Lotus Esprit. And you might go, how is that a pop culture car? But if you remember the James Bond movie, and I have to remember which one it was, You Only Live Twice. They had a car that he jumps, and then it turns into a submarine, and he has to put on they call it a wet submarine. So water actually enters in the cab of the car. So you still have to have a snorkel and everything on. Well, not snorkel, but breathing apparatus. But they actually made one. So that car actually works and was successful. So I'll get to that in a second. But the Lotus Esprit is a really long running car. I think it ran from like the early 70s all the way until 2004. Wow. And Lotus often is kind of moved around, a lot of different owners. So there's different motors throughout the life cycle of it. I think it started with just a 2-liter 4-cylinder back in the 70s, and in the 90s it had V8 in it by the time they were kind of getting ready to discontinue it. But interesting fact about the S1 version of it is, and the chassis is all the same throughout the whole life cycle, but that chassis is what the DeLorean actually used for its chassis. So they borrowed it from this car. But so the submarine car, though, for the Bond movie, kind of interesting fact about that is, again, it was a working car, and it was just built to look like this car. There was actually electric motors to actually run the submarine portion of it to make it go forward and everything. But after the movie was all done, the person who produced it got it back, and they put it in a storage unit, which they rented for 10 years. And it was one of those things where it got kind of lost. Like that person may have passed away. I don't remember exactly the history here, but it just ended up in the storage unit that everybody forgot about. And then one of these things where somebody just buys a storage unit without actually seeing inside of it, paid less than $100 for the storage unit. Back in, I want to say the late 80s, early 90s kind of time frame. And this car is in there and kind of starts figuring out what it is and starts realizing what he has on his hands. And he owned like a tool shop, and I think he was somewhat of a mechanic, so kind of got it fixed up, made it look a little nice. And now Elon Musk owns it. He bought it from this person for a pretty penny back in 2013. And he's told that he's going to be putting Tesla motors in it to remake it and make it work again. But just kind of a wild deal. But yeah, I don't know a ton of these cars. I've never obviously driven one. I've seen some of the newer ones of it, which again, they're all fairly similar. Like if I was to kind of scroll through here, you'd probably start to like maybe go, oh yeah, maybe I've seen one of those, like when we get into the 2000s and such here. But they look like every other wedge-shaped car. But when you get into the 90s, they kind of get a little bit cooler looking. But
yeah, no, I'm familiar with the name. I don't know a whole lot about them. I've heard that story. I don't know where I heard. Was that on a TV show or something about the
very well might have been. Yeah, I just was kind of looking up facts about it and saw that on it. So
yeah, I mean everything about that story rang a bell. Like even down to when you said Elon Musk, like that rang a bell too. Like I think I heard this story somewhere.
Yeah, so the nickname of the car was the Wet Nelly, I think is what they called it. So that was kind of what the name of that car was.
Jeez.
So
man, that's a hell of a lottery ticket.
Yeah, that's one of those situations where you're just like, why? You know, I couldn't imagine walking into something like that. Like, oh, I don't know what it actually went for, but you know, it was all of $100,000, like all of it and more, right?
I guess closer to 7 figures. I mean, that's
right.
That's a piece of movie and automotive history.
Yeah. So actually, sorry, I forgot. So it cost $100,000 to build at the time. So
okay.
And it went for 550,000 pounds, which I guess I don't know the trends, what that would be in US dollars at the time, but yeah.
More than we can afford.
Yeah, exactly. Elon Musk kind of money.
Yes. So, all right. Well, we're gonna end it with our bottomed out segment. So I think I went first last time, so I'll let you take this one. This is where every week we talk about cars that are as cheap as they're gonna ever be. If you don't buy one now, they're only going up from here, in our opinion. This is not financial advice, but we're probably right. So
that's definitely a good way to lead this off. I didn't get as much time to really think about this as I wanted to, and I don't need this definitely show a photo because everybody's gonna know what this looks like. But one of these cars, this car, like is so obvious, but at the same time, I just don't think it's getting cheaper, and they're not bad to find right now. So just the F body in general. You've had one of these, right? You just recently sold yours, right? Did I just steal yours for this episode? Okay, better keep thinking.
no, I gotta keep thinking. Go ahead. I knew this was a possibility.
We could do this one together. Who cares?
Yeah, let's do it together. Because I was kind of running out of time today too. I was like, I've had this one in the back of my head for a while, but I'm like, man, I keep talking about GM stuff, but I gotta get it out of the way because it definitely is real.
It's such a good one. I keep on. I really want to.
I'm wearing a Camaro shirt as we speak.
I really want to build a drag car, and I keep on going back between getting an F body or a C5. And the F bodies, I mean, you can find some decent examples for under 10 grand, like, and they're not bad cars. You know, that I grew up with that. So like that, I graduated 2003. So obviously all through high school, that was like the car, right, to get. And then even after that, WS6s, seeing those around, it's just like the coolest, rarest thing ever for me. But yeah, the LT1 was quick-ish, right? Like it wasn't bad, and you couldn't really mod it and get a ton of power out like the LS1. But
I remember they hated superchargers. They were high compression,
right? But it wasn't slow by any means either. Like it would hang with the Mustang at the time.
Yeah, they're in the 15s in the quarter mile.
I remember running into one of those when I had a 3 Series, which I thought was pretty quick. I ran like 14.8 with it or whatever, right? And I was like, this is fast, and thinking that I was going to pull that thing up top, but man, those things got going after 60. Like it just had all the torque in the world and just started to walk away from me. But yeah, you certainly know more about them than me, and you probably know the market for them better. But I think that's
I've had a couple. So one of my first manual trans I ever had actually was a 98 Z28 6-speed LS1 car, and that was kind of like, this is a big step for me because like before that I had like a 15-second car, like a LT1 Buick Roadmaster.
Right.
Now I'm going to a car that's 14 1/4 6-speed trans. It wants to hang it out around corners. It's it's a whole different animal than a full size Buick, but it was a blast to drive. But that was back in like 2012. I bought that thing. And
you remember what you paid for it back then?
80,000 miles, clean title, $6,000, red T-top. Yeah. So that was a, I thought that was like, nobody wants these things anymore. That's how it felt at the time. This is the old Camaro. The new one's out now. This is like an old car with all kinds of problems. That's the thing about the F bodies. Great motors, but just like every other GM car, cheap interiors. Particularly the Firebirds have like they're known for the hideaway headlights that don't work. Like the little stop doesn't work. And you just hear it grinding for 10 seconds after you turn the car off. The door panels always crack on the Trans Ams. Inside of them, there's always the same spot in the middle of the door panel on each side. They get this hairline crack through the centers. So they're just problematic. My one buddy, he said the Trans Am WS6 is the Corvette's white trash cousin that has daddy issues. He said hot white trash cousin. Like still has all the right curves places, but just like stay away from it. It's just got so many issues. Like the Corvette's the Val Victorian straight A student that the grandparents are proud of. The WS6 was just a mess, but gosh, it's got all the right curves. It's hard to not want one.
Well, the equivalent Corvette too is like those C5s like held up pretty well. Like, and you've owned a few of those as well, but every time I've seen one of those, they're usually in pretty good shape still, right? Which they're
that's the thing is I was going to bring that up too with the F bodies. Like you had two buyers, right? You had the kids and who wanted to hot rod them, who could afford them when they were new. Then you had like the old boomers that were kind of in their 40s and these things came out and they're looking at them going like, oh, these Camaros are fast again. So they buy the SS convertibles and you find them with 15,000 miles on them still, just and never done a burnout. Those kind of cars are still out there because all the anniversary cars, the anniversary 99 Trans Ams, the white with blue stripes, those things are doing stupid money right now. If they're low mileage, 40, 60, 70 grand. If they're like super low miles, which is way beyond MSRP. So that's kind of a encouraging sign to see they're going to be collectors.
Those certainly will. Like, I think find one of those, you're going to be sitting good.
Yeah. But WS6s, Camaro SSs in general, they're just, like you said, they're what you're saying. There's so many of them got turned into race cars, got turned into just beaters and used and abused. So kind of like everything else, when you get older, you have money, you have a little more brains, you have experience. you go, I still want one of those, but I want to start with a clean blank slate. So I want to find a nice, clean, untouched one if I'm going to do a build again. So even if someone's buying it to have it just be preserved and be stock, it's still worth more because it's original. Or if you just want to do an ultimate build, like I'm going to LT4 swap this thing, I'm going to put like a road chassis, a road shop chassis underneath it or something like that, you're still going to want just an unmolested car to start with. Yeah. So I just feel like those cars, you can get a good WS6, good SS in the teens right now with clean title under 100,000 miles. 50,000 mile cars probably 17 grand right now, if that. Right. So I think those cars will be mid-20s all days long within the next decade.
For sure. And I was thinking the interesting thing about that car is, like you said, like the boomers were buying them up. Like a lot of the people were buying like in 99, right? 30 years ago was the 69 Camaro and Firebird, right? Like, so that was kind of their way to get back into something that maybe they saw as when they were really young, or their parent, their father or whatever had. And now that's come back full circle again, right? Like,
yeah. And then the other thing, what do you think if you're a boomer who had a Camaro that was new when you're in your early 20s and 60s, and then it comes out in the late 90s, and you go, wait, it's faster than it ever used to be. It gets 29 miles per gallon, and it's got 350 horsepower, and I don't have to do anything to it. It just runs forever. Just give it oil changes. There's no carbs to tune or oil burning or nothing like the old small blocks. Yeah. It was just a better driveline all the way around. So that's why you see, it's not like, last time I talked about the SRT4 Neon. There was no boomers buying those things. It was all kids. They're all destroyed. It's really hard to find a clean one. But these were a mixed buyer. So you had young guys with money. They were building to race them or get them secondhand when they were used and destroying them. Or you had the guys that bought them new and held them.
Well, it's still that sweet spot of cars too. Like I would say a lot of the 90s cars, and I'll call that a 90s car because it mostly existed in the 90s. Like they had enough tech to be modern, but not enough to be complex, right? Like, so anybody can work on those, and they're not that crazy to mod, and like you don't get that much money. The biggest downside though is the interiors usually were kind of garbage. Like you could find a car that's 20 years older that has nicer interior.
Only people listening that own a 90s Pontiac will remember this, but there's a glitch with Pontiac radios with this era. Because I remember my cousin had like a 97 Bonneville, then my brother had a Trans Am. I just had a Trans Am. Like the radios get weird. It has that little rheostat volume switch, and you go to turn it down and it cranks up. It would just do it It's so obnoxious. It was a Pontiac thing with those Bose systems they had or whatever it was, or Monsoon, or I forgot what brand it was, but so annoying. Because like especially you get like a phone call and you're like, oh yep, you go turn the music down, and it just blasts up to full blast. Like they're riddled with just issues. They're just very not well built cars that just had awesome drive lines and great looks.
Oh yeah. But and like so many of those got robbed for their motor because 2010s, let's swap everything, right? Like, so people were buying the Firebirds, the Camaros, and maybe
that's where all the LS ones. That's where all the LS ones came from. Everyone just pulled them out of those.
Stole them out of those, and the T56s, right? Like that's how you got a T56 Trans, like because you didn't want the GTO because it was drive-by-wire, right? So that was kind of the Trans is fine, but like that was a big issue. And same thing with the LS3s and everything in the 2010s. I think that was LS3. They started with the 2010 Camaros. It was LS2.
I think so, yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think I could see at some point people that are a little bit younger than us probably wanting more of that 5th gen Camaro. But I think this one will hold on for a while. But I think at some point those 5th gens, I don't think they've gotten there yet, but those will bottom out here, and that will be kind of an interesting car to grab onto. I also had the 6th gen, but the 5th gens are starting to grab my attention. I think those are kind of starting to look cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that makes it easy that we kind of spent just as much time as we would have on 2 cars with one. But I had a hunch that was going to happen. I mean, eventually we're going to have the same idea, but I've been keeping that one in my back pocket for weeks. So. But I did just sell one, like you mentioned. I just had a built 02 WS6 as a pewter 6-speed T-top with 460 wheel horse, naturally aspirated big cam motor. But so yeah, those are kind of fresh in my head, and I already kind of miss it, now that it's winter time and I'm not driving anything fast. But
yeah, that's like the exact car I want to buy. And I think I texted you about this the other day. We were talking about cars, and I was just like, I want to buy one of those, and then it's like convince all my friends to go out to the drag strip with me. I'm like, let's just see who can get the best time of this thing. Like, who cares? The speed on it. You know, that's what it's for.
Well, that's the only other thing we forgot to mention is those stock rear ends are made out of glass.
Oh, so, yeah.
Once the minute you throw any sort of power at it, they just grenade. Actually, that first Z28 I told you about, I sold it to a guy who's probably a couple years younger than me at the time. So he's probably 20. I was 22 when I sold it. And he lived in the city. And he was part of like a hot rod street racing group, and he just dumped all his paychecks into full bolt-ons, made like a 480 wheel horse motor without changing the axle. And we were friends on Facebook at the time, and he posted the first video. He's staged at a Union Grove drag strip. He's up there, and light turns green, is boom, and just metal on the ground, just grenaded the rear on the first pass. Like, it literally cannot take one pass of that motor being hot rodded. So.
That was kind of GM's weakness, though, for that period, right? Yeah. Like, CTSs were the same. CTSVs, didn't they have poor rear ends, too?
They had wheel hop issues.
Oh,
really bad. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I got a story about that for another day. I brought one to the drag strip, and I'm still dizzy from the wheel hop. But it was, they made kits, though, to help fix that. I think they're pretty strong overall. I mean, you don't really break your half shaft from the wheel hop. So as long as you could stop the wheel hop, they could kind of take the power.
Okay. But for some reason, I was saying like the original, like the first LS1 CTSV had like the diff out of the V6 car or something.
Yeah. It was an LS6 actually, so they were 405 horse, but it could have been. Mine were all stock, so maybe once you threw boost at them or something, maybe they couldn't handle it. I never really pursued modifying mine because I was kind of buying it to sell it. But yeah, they were makes no sense because GM, like, they had the Chevy 12 bolt since the 60s, like just a bulletproof rear end that was indestructible, and somehow they just go backwards. It's like, if you're building performance, I don't care if you gotta scale it down, do what you gotta do, but just keep these key things in place that make it strong. You think you'd have figured out by
all the engineering time they spend to make something worse, right?
Oh yeah, it's insane. But, anyhow, that's all I got for you guys this week. Anything you want to mention, Steve?
No, just we'll have to think more about the next decade. Maybe we'll save that for a couple episodes, but we'll put a little more thought into it, especially when we get to the 90s. That's my era. I like that kind of era of cars. So
yeah, that's a lot to pick from, because I'm glad we got the 80s out of the way first. That was the hardest, best car of the worst decade. But 90s is fun. Some things started to get fun again.
Yeah.
So all right, well, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for listening.